It is setting up right now. All right, we are live, and just give a sec for the LinkedIn event to refresh, and then we'll be live official. I'll refresh it myself manually. Okay, we're good to go.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our LinkedIn live event. Parting with Sean, Jackie, and myself, we're going to work through an AI use case involving fintech and AI risks. So I'd like to introduce the situation with an opening statement. AI is rapidly transforming customer interactions in fintech, making end user engagement smarter, faster, and more personalized. We have brought together this panel of experts to explore a case study of a fintech company integrating an AI SaaS chatbot to enhance customer service. We're going to discuss the use case, implementation challenges, and lessons learned. So we've had these sessions before and conversations. I know all of you, including myself, have been on a lot of panels and conferences. And we felt the best way to discuss this topic is to make it a case study. So to make this a little more meaningful, we like to introduce a fictional company for this case study. North Compass Fintech was founded with the mission of modernizing financial services through AI-driven solutions while maintaining a strong security and compliance practices. Starting as a digital payment provider, the company quickly recognized the potential of AI to enhance customer interactions. As part of its innovation strategy, North Compass Fintech is deploying an AI SaaS solution to streamline support, optimize fraud detection, and improve compliance processes. However, this initiative comes with challenges: navigating regulatory requirements, mitigating security risks, and ensuring ethical AI deployment. The company's leadership is focused on balancing technology advancements with responsible risk management to set a new standard for AI adoption for fintech. All right, awesome. So that sets the stage. What we'd like to do next is introduce the panelists. So our panel today features seasoned fractional executives who have worked with companies tackling the challenges of AI adoption, guiding organizations through complex risks and strategic decisions involving deployment of AI solutions. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, go through their background a little bit, and then perhaps a brief anecdote about a time when AI risk management went wrong. So first, I'd like to introduce Jackie Wilkos.
Yeah, I'm mute right now, Jackie.
Haha, faux pas, right?
Hey.
I had birds in the background and I didn't want them being but maybe it'd be quiet and nice and peaceful to have the sound of birds. So I'm Jackie Wilkos, founder of Enlighten Privacy PC, a micro boutique data protection, privacy, and data governance law firm. And yeah, so I'll just keep my intro brief. And AI governance, was it AI governance, Terry, gone awry?
Governance or risk management, any kind of
Risk
AI
management.
awry story you wish to share, Jackie?
What I see a lot, and I don't know that it's necessarily gone awry, but set up for possibility to go awry at some point, maybe, but just really fast kind of rogue adoption of different AI tools without really looking at the potential risks or ethical considerations, just a desire like, hey, this looks really cool. This can do really amazing things. Our productivity can be super increased. So yeah, let's go do it. Let's put all the data in. So I think, it's that's great. It is exciting, but there is potential for it going awry. I have not seen anything go awry yet, which is great because ultimately we have been mindful and, taken a step, a little pause, done some thinking and implemented some good, I hope, some good ground rules. So yeah, no awry, but potential for awry. So I hope I don't see too much awry, but we'll see what you guys have to
Excellent. So I
say.
tell you what, I will knock on wood for you and your clients, and then we'll pass it over to Sean McLean.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, I'm Sean McLean. I'm the founder and CIO of Low High Advisors. We're a boutique fractional strategy firm that also implements and services the back office in technology, security, and your accounting needs. So I've had multiple forays already into AI strategy, AI implementation. We offer think tanks and workshops to help particularly small and medium-sized businesses plan out what they're doing. But in the past 2 years, as you can imagine, there's been many companies that have come to me that have not planned out particularly, and they've gone right in. And sometimes that is a strategy, right? You do need to put your feet into the shallow end of the pool sometimes before you jump in. But a couple of my clients have jumped all the way in. And really what we've seen and what we categorize that as called shadow IT, where they don't necessarily want to involve their technology or their IT vendors. So in a lot of cases, a lot of managed service providers that are also IT vendors don't help with these types of services yet. So they'll say, well, if you want to use Microsoft Copilot or a Microsoft Shop, you can use it. Otherwise, if you want anything else, go find it yourself. And that has been the biggest faux pas for a lot of companies is they will just find something, that's an ad or some other app that crosses their path. It might even be something that their kids brought up and say, hey, Dad, I really like using this cool thing. And all of a sudden it's like DeepSeek, right? And it's something that potentially is coming from another country, doesn't have the guardrails and the risk mitigation practices that we're going to be talking about today. And they just put it in, they put in their customer data, they put in their client data, their employee data right into it via spreadsheets or Word documents and saying, oh, I want to analyze this, give me an answer. And unwittingly, they have now disclosed very critical information to a model that has no protections in place. So I have had a couple clients that were evaluating like real cutting edge apps, like when DeepSeek first popped, or like when Manus first came out as an AI agent, and they just didn't get the approvals and other things in place to help understand what it meant. And then they're in that position where now they have to actually disclose what they've done to clients because they've actually exposed their data to problematic sources. So it is a very critical aspect of what we're going to be talking about today with risk mitigation, because this type of stuff is happening already a lot with businesses. Terry, back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I know we're only 8 minutes in, but I'd love to go a little bit off agenda and off plan already, Sean. I'd love the analogy you made to the shadow IT. And this is something IT was struggling with 20, 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any maybe quick lessons learned or maybe something we can take from that future generation of people going fast and beyond IT that we can leverage and apply in this AI space?
Yeah, because it's interesting. A lot of companies now really like AI operations and the whole mindset because you don't have potentially that bottleneck of IT. You don't have to go right to your IT department, create a ticket, and say, I need this, and then potentially not get the solution for weeks or months. And that's been a major gripe for a lot of companies and the whole reason why shadow IT really pops up. But the real critical factor is if you have an AI use policy that's part of your general WISP written security policy that states that these are the platforms that we as a company have agreed we're going to use. And it's not just IT, it's your security team, your executive team, your financial team. Everybody has said, we voted, we've talked about it. These are the tools we're going to use that have security built in. And that's where we're going to have to really implement and keep going. If you follow a procedure that then allows a approval and evaluation process going forward, and that's key for process improvement, that it can really also engage with the folks that say, well, I found a cutting edge tool. It's not on our list of approved platforms to use by the policy. I want to get it into the policy. Now you're providing that avenue for all employees, even if they're started this week or they've been there for 10 plus years, to say, I'm putting, my fist on the table and saying, I want to use this tool. We need to evaluate it, do our due diligence. And that really reduces that shadow IT rather than just going and doing it. Now, a lot of people are still going to use it, but if they do it in a personal way and they keep it to their personal data, that can give them that extra oomph to say, I've used it. I used it to help manage my day or my family's day or, whatever type of personal activity that you're looking to do. Then it has much more evidence when you put it into that approval process to say, IT people, please evaluate this tool. It's really effective, and I have all of this written out, and that can be your own personal case study. Unfortunately, that is tough for a lot of companies that don't have that framework built. Even for small businesses, it's usually non-existent, in my opinion. So, or my experience, and that's one of the critical paths. So, if you have that AI use policy, it should be part of that AI use policy. It's like, okay, if you have something that's not on this list, submit it through this form or this process, and then we, as an executive team, will evaluate it and then come back and either add or explicitly deny it, right? And they might say something like DeepSeek is explicitly denied unless it's used in this particular way. And then you can have those caveats. So that really reduces the shadow IT. But man, it's a really big problem with companies right now because a lot of them are saying, hey, we can go around IT for some of these things. And then people get that message and they're like, oh, cool, then I can do anything. And it's like, no, 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 wait, we don't want you to do that.
Absolutely. Good. Thank you. In the last introductions, my name is Terry Zimniak. I am a Chief Information Security Officer. I work fractionally for a number of companies. I'm a partner at a fractional consulting organization called Tech CXO. And my anecdote about AI risk management going wrong is I was working with a large financial company out of the Midwest. And they brought us in to rebuild and actually consolidate their legacy machine learning AI governance structure with the new generative AI. So it was a neat project. But what triggered it is Microsoft had turned on all the co-pilot functions and no one knew about it. No one was really tracking it. So it just kind of popped on. And people all over the organization were asking Copilot all these questions, and Copilot's access rights were beyond what the average user has. So a phrase I'm going to use today probably a couple of times is the idea that AI is tripping on these latent cybersecurity issues. Mm-hmm. So if you have too many access rights to start with, AI and generative AI is going to trip on that and make it worse. If your patching isn't done correctly, if your change control isn't done correctly, if your risk management isn't done correctly, AI is going to trip upon these lacking controls, and the problem is going to get worse and worse. So I see direct parallels between management of cybersecurity and AI, and we'll talk about that. Okay, great. So there's our introductions. Thank you very much for that panel. So let's jump into the questions. So before we dive into specifics, let's start with a big picture view. What are the most pressing risks fintech companies face when adopting AI, and how should they prioritize mitigating them? Sean, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. So the big one, and this is going to be somewhat of a repetitive message probably across all three of us, is that you need to have a due diligence plan in place to really treat your risk program. And that should have really basic steps to reaching out to your vendors, making sure that there are some critical base paths, like we call them table stakes in a lot of technology games when we're looking at the overall tech stack. And that could be defined by your own company. For a lot of fintech companies like this one, they're going to have real critical compliance and other business architecture risk plans that are going to be very, very critical. And I'm going to let Jackie talk about data privacy angles. But the one critical aspect that you really should look at is a third-party audit confirmation of each vendor, especially in the AI space. And so this is something that it can be around data, operations, and AI, meaning that they've gone through some level of outside verification. So you're not just putting your trust in the specific vendor stack, you're actually putting your trust in hopefully the CPA firm or external firm that has actually validated that. And with SOC 2 Type 2 or SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2, you're actually seeing an elevated approach that is going to be continuous so that that risk is also being evaluated and reported on by that validated third party. So you really want to make sure that that has been done. And then on top of that, again, that's not the end all be all. When you're looking at your tech stack with risk, you also want to make sure they have some critical security focused features that are available. And a lot of times you do have to pay more for these, but at least if they're available, that is, again, the entry point for your risk management. You don't necessarily, especially if you're a startup, always have to jump right into the enterprise level features, but you should have a path to do it, especially if you're getting funding. So some examples of these would include single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. It's mind-boggling to me in this day and age how many companies are still releasing AI-centric tools and workflows that do not have multi-factor authentication and single sign-on right there at as like a base level authentication piece of their platform, but it still is quite prevalent. I'm seeing this even across multiple verticals, not just financial, that include very heavily privacy focused data. So you really do need to have all of those pieces in your due diligence plan as a baseline, and then continue to look at other factors as well that are going to include, okay, have other big companies been part of their client registrar? Can you talk to them? Can you actually have a testimonial approach that goes in and says, well, what have they done? Have they had a breach recently? Did they handle that properly? Those are sometimes only things you can see when you talk to their clientele, particularly the large ones that already have those programs in place. Those are some real critical pieces that unfortunately a lot of companies don't do when they're evaluating. And it is going beyond just the proof of concept and the actual security testing that you should be asking your IT vendor to also do. So those are kind of like the basic levels. I'd love to hear what you guys think as well.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think a couple things I'd like to add to that is financial organizations, like any organization that's tightly controlled by regulations, the governance is really important. So the governance and the culture, because as you were describing earlier, Sean, um, sometimes things slow down if you have too much governance or not enough governance, or conversely goes too fast. So even
Mhm.
prior to governance, I think there needs to be kind of organizational statements of really what's our plan. Do we want to be, do we want to be cutting edge? Do we want to be intentional laggards? Do we want to be somewhere in the middle? So what's our strategy as far as AI? That'll lead to the governance, and then governance gives you the good guidelines. So if we have guide rails that say, low risk stuff, Jackie can approve or Sean can approve, and medium level risk, maybe all three of us have to approve. Start putting those structures in place so it's not arbitrary decisions. And the arbitrariness, as well as I guess lack of overall control, are really the big issues that I've seen. So companies want to move fast, employees want to move fast. Build the minimum controls and the structure to support that is I think how companies are going to excel in this space.
Great point.
Yeah, and just to add from the privacy perspective, I think Sean, you talked a lot about looking at the risk like from a more of a security related standpoint with, the basic like multi-factor or single sign-on and looking at audits, audit reports. I think the corollary to that from the privacy side, or, we kind of alluded to, we're in fintech, we have some potentially, sensitive information or highly regulated information, thinking about, just individual financial information. We have, new privacy laws coming online that address personal information. We have Gramm-Leach-Bliley on the federal level, two of these sort of working at different ends of the spectrum, the compliance spectrum. But thinking about, okay, I'm always looking at what is the data? What are we doing with it? What are they doing with it? and what do we want to be doing? And to Terry's point, the strategy is really important. What are the goals we're trying to achieve by using this new AI tool, this new AI system? What are we trying to accomplish, and what is the data that's needed? And basic data minimization principles, we always kind of go back to the basics, right? Basic data minimization principles, being intentional and cautious about what data is being fed into the AI system. And I think we've all heard about this before, but it bears repeating, looking at, what is the vendor who's providing this AI system? What are they doing with the data? Are they using it to train up the model or not? Where, could this financial data somehow be spat out as an output down the line where we don't want it to be potentially? Or could there be hallucinations happening with respect to the outputs that we're then, taking in and incorporating as part of the overall financial data for a customer, things like that? And so having, to Terry's point, kind of to bring everybody in, a clear strategy, but also being really mindful and looking at the contracts with these vendors in terms of what are they doing with the data? How is the data being used to train up the models? And do we want that data that we're submitting into these tools? Do we want our inputs to necessarily consist of some of this highly regulated sensitive data, or can we limit that to some extent to still achieve the same output? And if we do need to put, some of this sensitive, highly regulated financial data into the model, can we limit the use of training? Can we, can it be just for our own purposes as a customer? Get that negotiated contract in place. Maybe it takes more time to go. Or to your point, Sean, you mentioned paying a little bit more, getting the enterprise edition, and then it mitigates the risk significantly, where it's actually a pretty good investment in terms of the tools, so that we're minimizing the risk and kind of, setting up boundaries with respect to data use, training data, using that training data beyond the boundaries of our own organization. And given the regulated space, we probably want to be thinking about that and implementing those fences around our use of this AI system. So yeah, I think kind of adding on to what all of you said, the strategy is really important, and then looking at what's actually being in place, being put in place in terms of the contracts, and making sure the diligence is done on that end so that it matches up with what we actually need to do and the protections we need to comply with when it comes to the data that we're using as part of this AI system.
That's a great point. I'll quickly add that a lot of the good AI companies that are evolving, and I'll throw, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, et cetera, in that category, they are really focusing on paying for their actual training data in a much more transparent way. OpenAI got into a lot of trouble early on where they were actually targeting, public data sources, writing sources, books, periodicals that they were not paying for at the beginning because they felt it was public, but it's not. There are IP protected information in those data sources. So similarly for fintech, it really needs to be paid sources to help cut down on those hallucinations. And a good vendor is going to right those wrongs like they're doing right now, and they're actually paying and compensating the different data sets that they are adding into their models to make it more effective, and then showing that they're having third parties test those models for hallucinations. Now, the academic world has many model testing pieces that are still continuing to evolve. Stanford has a big one, MIT. There's a lot of those that are still pointing out loopholes in the model training that is happening. So you really want to look at all of that holistically, not just one, but almost like a full market analysis of each model that you're working with. But again, it's starting to evolve into these are the companies that can be trusted because they're investing so much into the actual governance and security that helps with that risk mitigation, whereas some of the other startups haven't quite built that same enterprise methodology yet. So it's a great point you make, Jackie, around focusing on those models And a lot of us breeze right past when a model comes out, all of that technical jargon that's coming in their maybe their secondary part of their PR. But you really do should look at that, especially in a highly regulated industry like fintech. So that's a great point.
I don't know about you, Sean, but I really like reading the trust documentation. I'm a big fan. I was just looking at Einstein's trust documentation on Salesforce's website. So I don't know. I think it's a fascinating read personally, but but
There's a
it is
few
to
of
your
us.
point.
Yeah.
I'm making light, but to your point, it is important that there is, or at least is there trust documentation out there for the AI system that you want to be using? And if there's not, that's informative too.
Right.
And then if there
Mhm.
is, what is that trust document saying, or documentation saying? What are they disclosing? What are they not saying? But even just taking a quick scan through to see what's out there, I think it's a developing realm as, various companies start putting more and more of that ethics, AI trust documentation out there, publicly available on their websites, and seeing, kind of cross comparing what different controls are in place across different vendors,
Mhm.
can definitely help make determinations, especially in a highly regulated space. It's important.
Awesome. And that's a great segue into the next question. What are the key components of an effective AI risk management program for fintech companies? And how should organizations like North Compass Fintech structure their approach to proactively identify, assess, and mitigate risks? So I'll take a first stab at this. When I help companies build their AI risk management programs, I like to parallel what they have. Hopefully, they've already got one. Their cybersecurity risk management program, a lot of the same exact concepts. So you've got the technical controls you're worried about, the administrative controls, the contractual controls all in place. End of the day, you're going to have input from the same parties. Regulations have inputs on AI risk management. Your contracts are going to have guidance to help you understand your risk management, the risks that you can accept and the ones you can they have to manage. Um, your policies and your culture and your mission, all of that will inform your AI risk appetite. So take all that input just like you would from a cyber perspective and then flush through all your controls. A lot of the controls luckily are the same. So if you're building an AI solution, you still have to worry about backing up and access control and patching and antivirus. If you're purchasing an AI solution, you still have to worry about your contractual protections. How are you going to validate what it is? How are you going to deal with your shared security model? All that's the same. So the good news is a lot of the controls are the same. But again, latent security, if you do poorly on security, you're going to get double dinged because you have a security issue and an AI issue. But there are some unique controls in the AI space, as Sean and Jackie were talking about. The regulations are changing daily, maybe not daily, but pretty quickly. So when you build a program to deal with today's understanding of the AI regulations, tomorrow it's changing. If you have contracts based on what your preferred vendor's currently doing, it's going to change tomorrow. Perhaps your clients downstream have expectations on your use of AI. That's going to change. So that's a very dynamic situation.
Mhm.
Another thing I'll call out that I found fascinating is almost all the guidance on AI governance starts with people. You got to educate your people. You have to have structures in place for the people. You have to have governance and procedures. So when you talk technology issues, cybersecurity issues, it's people, process, technology. I find it interesting that a lot of the AI governance focuses on the people part of the governance chain. They all say educate your people, train your people, make sure they understand what they can and can't do, make sure they know when to raise their hand, those sorts of things. So the people part of AI risk is I think, something unique that people have to learn how to manage.
That's a great point. I think just like security risk and security awareness training, that is a big gap that is really evolving around AI operational training and then helping not only your people stay up to date with what are the best practices for each tool that is being properly tapped, but then as you pointed out, these models are changing heavily that they need to know how to continually stay up to date on how to interact with each of them. And that training is really tough to keep up. You almost need like an internal person or some external fractional resource that you are really utilizing heavily to keep your people up to date. And as we've seen in the news already in 2 years, there's been multiple cases of employees that just mistakenly disclose things through an AI tool that they just really didn't have that internal governor, that internal like cultural build that says maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And a lot of times we have that now built into our mindset because of phishing testing and training where you get an email and you're like, oh, this looks really fake. Like, I don't think I should do this. But we don't quite have that into our business DNA when you're typing in a chat into an AI model or you're actually utilizing some other port that's been customized internally because we might think, well, this is safe. Like our company has deployed this, and it's not always the case because things are changing so rapidly. So it's a great point, Terry.
And yeah, just to add to what both of you said, I do see the education component as key. We're even seeing that in AI legislation that's coming through. The EU Act has a core component around AI literacy that's already in effect now. But we asked about kind of key components of a risk management framework. So I think, yes, one is adapting and evolving as the landscape adapts and evolves. And even to the point, as we're using these AI systems, AI tools, the risks are going to change as the tools themselves change and as our use cases change. So we need to be up to date, not only with the new tools that are coming out and becoming available, but the tools that we are using, how are they shifting? How are they changing? Are they deploying new features? Are we, starting to use different new additional features? And that kind of harkens back to basic privacy risk management as well. Terry, you mentioned that the basic tenets of security risk management also apply, and privacy is sort of the same deal.
Mhm.
The same basic tenets apply, and so it's monitoring what's the data that we're using and how are we using it, and if we're using it in new or different ways by deploying different features or shifting the way we're using an existing model, keeping up to date with, how we're evolving with what we're currently using, and on top of that, then what else are we adding over time? It's a lot, right? And Sean, you kind of mentioned like, yikes, you need a person to be on top of this, or at least some sort of resource. And that's important, and also sort of a framework for tracking all of this. Is there sort of an internal system where, maybe we can build on top of our third-party risk management framework and, using that to kind of now add on and track some AI use cases within the organization? That could be really helpful to effectively mitigate risk. And what are we already have in place? Is that enough? Maybe we need something in addition, or maybe that's good enough. But just keeping an eye on that is really helpful. In addition to, new laws and new compliance requirements that are coming online, which we can talk about. But really kind of there's a lot to be done. But I think one thing, I think was either said or, at least implied is this is a cross-functional effort, it's a full organizational effort. Everybody who's using AI tools within the organization, within our fintech company here needs to be working together to keep track of what's happening, what's evolving, and continually iterating so that we're complying with the latest and greatest and keeping up to date with the latest risks so that we're ideally keeping up, if not out ahead. I think out ahead, is kind of a like, maybe we'll get there at some point, but let's just keep up. But it's a cross-functional effort, multidisciplinary effort, and it impacts all areas of the organization. So having, a multi-stakeholder group if you can. Ideally, if this is a small company, that's hard to do. So maybe
Hmm.
having external resources to help. But who are some of the key stakeholders within the organization? Ideally, kind of um, multidisciplinary or across different facets of the organization who can come together and, back to Terry's point about strategy, really be thinking about the strategy and helping to keep the strategy moving along, keep it up to date with the evolving risk is important. And that kind of underscores yet again the importance of the human component on top of all of the AI beauty that we're wanting to deploy and work with as we think about implementing these new AI tools.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that end of the day, the risks are evolving. So your contractual risks, the technology is
Yeah.
changing, the use cases are changing. But don't forget, there are low risk cases you can start with. So while you're building governance and while you're building your interdisciplinary team to help oversee all this, go identify some low risk use cases. Maybe that's where you begin. Maybe you don't want to start by blowing your medical records up to Chat GPT. Maybe you want to start with Zoom transcription or something internal or limited range copilot, whatever it may be. There are
Mhm.
legitimate low risk, high value use cases that can be considered for your organization, and maybe that's the right place to start.
Yeah.
But I'll take it then, Jackie, back to another question for you is you touched a little bit about the regulations in AI. So these AI regulations are evolving. So how can fintech companies or companies in general, how do we stay ahead or at least be mindful and manage these compliant changes while still maintaining the innovation that we want for our business?
Yeah. So, wow, what's going on? How do we keep up? I think, just to kind of give a lay of the land right now, I think it's especially important for fintech companies because we have, a lot of the laws that we're seeing coming online, like the EU AI Act has a component of this, the Colorado AI Act, and some pending legislation, that's sort of hanging out in different US states all centers around, or at least a lot of it, on high risk AI systems and AI tools. And high risk meaning like making consequential decisions, right? To use the legal terminology. But really, what does that mean in the fintech space is given the sensitivity of the data that's being processed, they're depending on how you're using AI, different AI tools, AI systems, you could be treading into those high risk territories, those consequential decision territories. And so being on the lookout for where that might happen, where you might trigger these high risk AI laws. So it's sort of like, all right, let's triage. What do we actually need to be paying attention to? I think the high risk realm is one that's particularly relevant for the fintech space. But just in general, any company has an HR component, right? And high risk also touches on HR and hiring decisions. So really for any company, that's a good lookout is, all right, Colorado AI Act deals with high risk. There are a lot of other laws likely that are going to follow the Colorado model as AI legislation spreads across the state. So thinking about, okay, am I going to tread on the high risk? If so, how? What do I need to do to comply? There are disclosure obligations, things like that. But just kind of being on the lookout to start. And if you don't want to step into that territory, think about switching up how you want to deploy the AI tool or changing your approach. I think there are other sort of laws coming online around like generative AI. That's a big, a big ticket item. Areas where, labeling laws, or maybe there's something where you want to have a chat bot and you want, under certain laws, you need to label it as, hey, this is an AI chatbot, or the output of this is generated from AI. We're giving you financial reports that are really cool. And by the way, these are generated by AI, things like that. We're paying attention to the Gen AI laws and rules. And again, a lot of the different states, this is all happening at the state level in the US. And so from a state by state perspective, could this apply? How does it apply? Are there exclusions? But just knowing sort of those third rail areas like the high risk, like Gen AI, and then if you are deploying, processing data that could trigger the high risk, could, you're using Gen AI for different purposes. Ooh, okay, we're in one of these territories that's being regulated. Let's take a quick look just to make sure, whether we reach out to a third party resource or we kind of look internally, however it is, but let's take a quick breather to say, hey, could we be tripping up these laws? And if so, what do we need to do before we even get into all of the details about these laws? So those are some big areas, I think, to pay attention to. But the bigger thing is, keeping humans involved. And, we talked about it at the top, basic governance policies, and having a clear strategy, being really clear on the intentions around what do we want to use, what are the goals we're trying to achieve, is this AI tool going to do it for us, and how much data do we really need to be submitting to the tool as inputs to to achieve the goal that we want to achieve, and can we do it without stepping into these regulated areas, or at least mitigating the extent to which we are, is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would add, you talked about an inventory of AI solutions, which is great, but don't forget, you can have multiple use cases for each AI solution. So a chatbot, for example,
For sure.
maybe it's low risk if the chatbot answers information on what's our street address, but it becomes high risk if the chatbot is telling me Terry's bank account information. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Thanks, Terry. And that's why it's so important to be really clear on what is the use case we're talking about and what is the data that we're talking about entering as inputs into this tool.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Cool.
And I'll add quickly that, Jackie was just at RSA. It's a big security and compliance conference out here in the San Francisco Bay Area every year. And there's a lot of news from the vendors in this space talking about what they're doing for compliance and regulations and internal regulations. But to really double tap on what Jackie said, in the United States right now, there's no federal regulation for these companies. It's completely up to the vendor, the company itself, from an enterprise perspective, to apply self-regulations. And one big move that's happened in that space is all underneath this new acronym called MCP, the Model Context Protocol. Google now has elevated another layer on this called the agent to agent protocol. So you'll see A2A and MCP as a lot of common acronyms in this space. And it was huge in the RSA world in the last 2 weeks. So Google is giving extra layers of like risk management and security within their platform around the Gemini world. There's other vendors like Palo Alto Networks and Dremio and App Omni that also are releasing MCP servers. And Microsoft also had a huge announcement that week that they're not only enhancing their MCP server for more risk mitigation, but also they're adopting Google's agent to agent protocol. So you're going to see Salesforce, you're going to see IBM, all these large players in both data and tech operations, even down to that chatbot example, where if you're deploying a chatbot, as Terry mentioned, to your Microsoft shop to Microsoft Teams, and the data is all in a Microsoft data warehouse, like a Microsoft Fabric, there's very little risk from exposure, but there is potential risk about where those models are touching the different pieces of the chatbot. Now, most small businesses also are pulling from other different sources. So you might say, well, we're not using Teams for chat. We're using Slack, and we're using a Notion backend on the fintech space for our knowledge base. So now we have multiple APIs connecting through potentially multiple agentic platforms to get to the data, to get to financial modeling. And now that's the spider web that we're worried about from risk perspective. You need to have one central piece, and that's MCP, that can now govern all of those connections, permissions. It's really important to start talking to your vendors about what they're doing in that area, because if they're not doing anything, there's really no endpoint protection, there's no security, there's no oversight into how that data is moving around. And you might think, well, Sean, that can't be true. there has to be some level of oversight, right? There's an API connection there, but the API key is just one level. Again, it's just one password across all of those different data connections, and they can easily be hacked if you're targeted. And who are the bad guys targeting, especially in America these days? Financial based companies. So fintech, insurance, CPA, attorney, those types of companies, aside from just the government, are heavily being targeted to be able to get into their data because it is so valuable. So that is a really big part of like when you're looking at risk and looking at the tech tools to protect it, you can't assume that it's just going to be there because they're out in the space. You really have to have that deeper conversation with them. And right now, that space is also moving very quickly as based on the last 2 weeks. So it's a good time to look at it because more of these tools are available.
Everything's moving quickly.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay. Well, we're almost out of time. So I want to thank the panel for participating in the conversation. And maybe we'll sign off with one last bit of wisdom for those listening in. And I'd like you in particular to focus maybe a little bit on what Sean was talking about, which is the vendor-related risks. So we're assuming that our North Compass FinTech leverage Salesforce's Einstein product, okay, using generative AI and the agent capabilities. So maybe from a legal technology, and I can talk on cybersecurity, what's one or two bits of guidance you would tell this company? Again, they're looking to leverage a third-party AI solution. So this vendor risk management. What are your last bits of wisdom for them, Jackie?
I think a clear catchphrase of like clear intention, clearly communicated. So, and I
Right.
think that gets back to, having a governance policy, an AI use policy, and just some standard basic education. But clear intention, clearly communicated. This is what we're doing with this chatbot. This is the data that is going to be leveraged as inputs. We're not going to accept any other data. And this is the limited purpose of it to start. And then as we evolve to the point of keeping up with evolution, we're going to be monitoring, we're going to be working together and evolving our guidelines and risk management as we go, but always maintaining that clear intention, clearly communicated, I think is important.
Great
Awesome.
point.
I'll go ahead and add then that from a cyber perspective, most companies already have a third-party cyber risk assessment process of some sort. Maybe you give your vendor a spreadsheet, maybe you look at their SOC 2 audits, whatever it may be, but there's some level of oversight before you start sharing services and data and maybe users across companies. Leverage those processes and you just have to scale them into account for AI. So in the AI space, you're going to have your contractual protections, your where can the data sit? Can it be offshore? Does it have to be onshore? Can you send it down to third and fourth parties? What can you have in there? So realize you already have these basic controls probably in place. You're worried about your partner's security risks impacting you. Now you've got to worry about your partner's AI risks impacting you. So leverage those same processes and scale them for the AI considerations.
Hmm.
And I guess Sean, you can wrap up, take us home, big guy.
Yeah, the biggest one, and Salesforce is a great example, is that you can't just trust the company, unfortunately, anymore. You really do have to get an outside perspective. And Salesforce has a ton of partners in their ecosystem. They have huge conferences. You can find them, anywhere on the internet, right off of Salesforce website. They also have this new evolving agent force, which is actively being developed. And so you're going to want to find a partner that is really investing their own time and resources into this risk management structure, this innovation structure, so that you don't have to. And also, you don't have to just take what a sales engineer from Salesforce is telling you because their whole conception of wealth and success is just to get you in the door. And then at that point, their job is mostly done. They just want to keep you spending the money and rolling it forward. A partner is going to have certifications in the ecosystem, and they're going to be really looking at your own risk and your own success, so that's more of an operational partnership. So I would really encourage you to look at that. And again, because of that specific tech ecosystem, you can find partners for other types of vendors and other types of pieces as well. But make sure it works for you. Make sure it's a cultural fit, a governance fit. That's going to be a critical path to being able to have success in this type of world. Because again, a lot of small fintech startups don't have that role internal. You're going to want to leverage it externally and make sure that you're investing properly in that labor.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, fellow listeners out there. Sean, Jackie, thank you for your time. A reminder that if you are listening in and you have any questions on AI, whether it's security, legal, or technical, you've got some great advisors here available. Sean's at Low High Advisors, Jackie at Enlighten Privacy, and I'm at TechCXO. So again, we thank you for your time. Look for the next session. Jackie and Sean and I have done this before, and I think we're going to keep doing it. We're getting a lot of good feedback from everyone. So thank you. We appreciate your feedback, thoughts, and suggestions.
Thanks, everybody.